record this. Currently in the introduction, we're going to start off with Dr. Dave Mittman, who is the immediate past president of the AAPA, and who is going to give a brief history of the PA title and title change efforts. We'll then hear from Lisa Gables, who is the current AAPA CEO. It's going to go through some facts and findings of the WPP title change report. And then we'll have Dr. Stephen Lewia, who is a current director at large in the AAPA Board of Directors, who's going to give some next steps and considerations for practicing PAs. And then we'll have a question and answer. And more about the question and answer, there should be a function at the bottom where you can post questions. So go ahead and do that throughout the presentation. And you can upvote questions. Once we get to the end, we'll have moderated questions with those questions that were upvoted most. In addition, we plan to change the settings so that when we're in question and answer, you can raise your hand if you'd like to ask a live question and we can unmute you. And if you're interested in more information, the AAPA has published the report online on their website, and you can access that if you're an AAPA member at this website. If you Google AAPA title change, it's the first website that pops up. It has additional information for those that aren't members, but you can access the full report if you are a member. And for those that would like to have discussions with other students, like we had hopefully planned with this, that we're unable to do with the breakout rooms, we're going to send out a interest form to all of you that participated. And if you'd like to do that, we would like to facilitate that. So look for that and look to fill it out. And the last thing, and I'm just going to read this as it appears, any information shared today beyond the facts from the WPP AAPA reports are the personal opinions of the speakers and in no way represent the opinions of AAPA, the AAPA Board of Directors, or the AAPA House of Delegates. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And I'm going to introduce our first speaker. So our first speaker is Dr. Dave Mittman. Dave Mittman has been a PA leader for over 45 years. Dave co-founded the LIU PA Program Student Society in 1973, was president of the New York State Society of PAs in 1979, and served on the AAPA Board of Directors twice, 35 years apart. Dave also has won the AAPA Public Education Award for leading the march in Trenton, New Jersey to establish PA practice. Dave was introduced to medicine as a medic in the United States Air Force and later had the distinction of becoming the first PA allowed to practice in the United States Air Force Reserves. Dave spent almost 9 years in a primary care group practice in Brooklyn, New York, and left to begin a career in medical publishing with Physician Assistant Journal in late 1983. Dave left PA Journal to co-found Clinicians Publishing Group in 1990 and Clinician Reviews Journal in 1991. This was the first journal written for both MPs and PAs. Dave and his partners took Clinicians Group and built it into a major publishing business, launching 8 journals in 6 different physician specialties within an 8-year period, something never done before in the history of medical publishing. In 2001, Clinicians Group was acquired by Jobson Publishing. Dave left in 2004. Dave recently completed his term as president of the AAPA after serving on the AAPA board for 5 years. Dave also previously served on the AAPA board from 1982 to 1984. Dave also was awarded the honorary distinction doctorate in medical science in 2020 from the trustees of Lynchburg University in Lynchburg, Virginia. In 2008, Dave co-founded Clinician One, which was the largest NP&PA informational clinical social community on the web. Clinician One was acquired by a private firm, and Clinician One ceased publication in late 2019. Dave is now involved with a video question and answer feature on POCN. Dave has also served as treasurer of the Association of Family Practice PAs, a co-founder of the American College of Clinicians, the first president for executive and administrative PAs and PAFT. Dave has authored numerous papers and studies and publications as diverse as Chicken Soup for the Expectant Mother's Soul, U.S. Pharmacist, Medical Marketing and Media, the British Medical Journal, and many others. Dave is a noted expert in PA and PA practice, both in the U.S. and around the world. He's published papers on both NP and PA prescribing. He has consulted for many companies on NP and PA practice and has spoken at numerous PA and NP meetings with audiences ranging from 5,000 to 8,000. Dave is married to his high school sweetheart, Bonnie, for over 45 years and has 2 wonderful adult children. Going to Morning, Dave.
Good morning. If we can make that, yep, that's great. Thank you. Hopefully everybody can hear me. And thanks for the amazingly long and action-packed introduction. Seriously, it's really nice. So let's begin. Next slide. Okay, next slide, because basically you told everybody what I was going to tell everybody in a little bit shorter. And again, I'm going to tell you that I'm only speaking for me, no one else. This is not, obviously, when we're speaking about the future, it's really hard to have policy about the future. So it's not like we're all looking to duck, you know, what the AAPA stands for or where we stand. It's just that we don't really, our stand at this point is physician assistant is our official title. So anything more than that has to be our own opinion and not the official policy of the AAPA. So that's why we're discussing it like this. Okay, let me take these pictures off so I can do this. Great. So we'll go through some history. The first PAs graduated Duke, as you all know, as physician's assistants in 1967. And by the way, the normal way an editor would write someone who assists a physician would be a physician's assistant. That's why we today still have probably at least half the people who write about us with this title. Soon after we were birthed, Dr. Stead at Duke and others felt that assistant really didn't fit, and that the professional role and relationship that PAs started to develop would probably be more than what an assistant would be. And this is really interesting. In 1970, the AMA declared that the term associate would best describe the duties of the PA, and that assistant was too general because there were medical assistants. And don't forget, this is 1970. Nurses were looked at as assistants. There were a zillion assistants in the office, and they really wanted to elevate the PA as a professional. And they felt that, again, assistant was too general. And they came out with a statement saying that. In 1972, though, the AMA House of Delegates rejected that notion and decided that assistant was going to be the preferred term for our profession. So one thing I want to point out now is that even to this day, we were really never given the ability to determine our own title for our own profession. It was physicians, it was educators, it was regulators, it was clearly organized medicine. And if I were to say who would oppose any change today, it's not going to be the accountants, it's not going to be the lawyers, it's not going to be legislators, it's not going to be regulators generally. It's probably still going to be organized medicine. But at least now we are looking at our own title and we will determine what it's going to be in the future. And that's a good thing. Next slide. So there's where I went. I went to a physician's associate program at LIU. Next slide. Some titles, just so everybody knows that there weren't 2 or 3, there were, starting from the bottom, and I think you'll find this interesting, medical care practitioner, child health associate, which is still, by the way, I think being used in some way in Denver, healthcare practitioner, MedX, which is still being used with the PA programs in Washington State, the MedX program and then their satellite programs, physician associate, which is still being used at Yale, soniatrist, which was something that was thrown out, and it means to practice next to in Latin, clinical associate, Primex, which was a primary care extender, medical associate and physician assistant were all in the beginning names for our profession, really, or people who did what we did. So they were all really interchangeable when people were having conversations also. And that was strange because some of those PAs did different things than other of those PAs. And so it was like the Wild West for a while. Next slide. Just to show you that, here's the official journal of the AAPA. And it, for years, this is all it had on its cover. It was probably looked like this. It was small for 2 or 3 years. And look at all of the people they considered PAs. And again, child health associate, even pediatric nurse practitioners on there. Physician associate is in the middle, Primex, MedX. So health associate, again, a plethora of titles, all trying to describe a person that does what a physician does who isn't a physician, basically. Even nurse practitioner is in there. So that's fascinating, considering that was really the logo we used for our official journal for years. Next slide. So when I graduated in 1975, I would say the majority of programs were using the term associate in some way to describe our education and training when we graduated. MedX was popular, and there were a number of MedX programs, not just in the Northwest, but it was, Seattle was where it was born. And if you don't know about the program itself, it's fascinating and still in use. And I thought they always did a wonderful job in educating PAs. And they called their PAs MedXs, medical extensions, medical extenders, I'm not sure. I think it's medical extensions. But in those same years, organized medicine was really pushing 73, 74, 75, 76, 77. So any of the programs that were associate, any of the states that used that term at all were really being lobbied hard, and all the new programs were being pushed hard to use the assistant title. And the reason was organized medicine. This was only coming out of organized medicine. It wasn't coming out of ourselves. It certainly wasn't coming out of PA programs. No PAs were marching with signs in the street saying, let's change our name from assistant to associate, or associate to assistant, I mean. But the medical organizations felt that associated, the explanation was, it was like we were equals. And, you know, we brought up an associate professor is not a full professor. And, you know, and many of the other reasons why we thought associate fit. And they wouldn't buy it. And we knew in 1975 and 6 and 7 that there was no way we would win this battle. I mean, there were probably 14, 15, 16,000 of us, and it was much more important to look at things like Medicare reimbursement than it was to worry about this at that point. So assistant became our accepted title. And next slide. And that's when that's me, by the way, examining a nice young man at work. He was one of my PA students, actually. And I was a physician's associate. And there really was an interesting difference between being that and an assistant, by the way. Next slide. And that's just how I looked when I was young. I just have to throw that in so you all didn't think I looked like this my whole life. Next slide. Also, we had associates in the White House. And there's a card of, probably no one has this card except me because I save everybody's cards. But he was one of the first White House PAs, probably number 4 or 5. And as you know, there have been PAs in the White House now for 35, 40 years. So, and described himself as a physician associate way after, by the way, we had changed to assistant. Next slide. So what's going on? For many years, since the beginning of the profession, obviously, and for many, since the beginning of the profession, the assistant part of our title has been felt to be an impediment. And we'll go over some of the reasons why people have felt that way. And I'm not trying to sell you either way. I will talk about it. Many felt it to be confusing to patients, some in a derogatory way, and many of us that were already titled and graduated as physician associates were probably a little bit more bothered by it because we had lived in another paradigm where we were considered in a different way, I would say. Some found it politically motivated, which we didn't like. And then it just didn't work. So let's dig a little bit deeper on this for a second. I was going to tell you a story, but I think we should leave that time for later, and if we can get to it later, that's great. So next slide. Thank you. So two things I'd want you to know also. From 1975 until today, because there have always been people dissatisfied with the title and thinking that people thought we were basically medical assistants, and that was always the first reason. It's just confusing. It's not who we are. So for the last 45 years, there have been studies, some done by states, some done by specialty organizations, some done by the AAPA and other PA organizations, asking if you felt either the title described who you were, or other ones asking if you really wanted to change it. And they all asked about physician associate. That was the other go-to title. There was no other one ever considered. And then in all of the studies that I could go back and identify, there was significant dissatisfaction with the assistant title. Though there was never a study that I could find, and I don't think there is one, and I've lived through all of them, trust me, where the assistant won out. Most PAs felt assistant didn't accurately describe who we were, what we did. And interesting to note, over 40 years later, the WPP survey, which I know Lisa will talk about, said very much the same thing. It's all the things we thought and gut-wise about it came through factually in the study. So that was very interesting. Next slide. In 2005, we had 100 PA leaders get together, and we actually wrote a petition to the AAPA, and I wasn't involved with the AAPA at this point. And we asked the AAPA to look into changing the title, basically doing the WPP study, but maybe on a much lower level. And nothing happened. We then had emails sent in, and 6,000 people sent in emails and said, please look at changing the title, and still nothing happened. And in fact, PAs for Tomorrow was actually formed around this one issue, and it was title change. The House of Delegates, time to time, every few years, a resolution would come up, people would talk about it, we might talk about it for a longer time, and then it would just filter away, or people would say, let's wait until next year and we'll look at it again, and no action was really taken. And in 2013, I think it was, the AAPA actually did a survey, and I think it was a great thing that we did that, and they asked about title change. They also asked if you would pay more for dues if we changed the title, which some people thought was a little pejorative. And the majority of respondents still wanted or felt that a title change was needed. And then really for the last 7 or 8 years, again, people just spoke about it, didn't do much. And 2 years ago, I guess it was, maybe it's 3 years ago now in the House of Delegates, I'm losing years because of COVID. We basically looked at it again in the House of Delegates, and the House of Delegates decided they wanted a third-party, hands-off, no interference by the AAPA or the board of directors or anyone, and they wanted a real third-party business, or people who do this for a living, experts, to look at our title, to look at if it was the right title for us, if it accurately described us. And the WPP report came out of that, or WPP was hired to look at all of the questions, and that will be reviewed later. Next slide. So a few short answers to some whys. And this isn't trying again. I would say that most PAs agree that the title's a problem, but what has come up over the years and over the years and over the years is assistants aren't who we are and what we do. And at our core, and more now with OTP and with the full practice component of it, we're full clinicians. And I have to tell you, you may not know this, by the way, but the first thinking about our profession was that, and even some of the legislation you still practice under reflects this, it was that the PA would sort of gather the information and bring it to the physician who would diagnose and treat. And so assistant worked for a while because that's kind of what we did, even though we never did that. That's what it said we did. Now, when we're listed as primary care providers, it really does get confusing. So we are different than physicians. So the word physician in our title is a bit confusing, and we're not assistants. So that's inaccurate. And in our society, I think forever, assistants really have been people who go to 6 or 8 or 9 month courses. It's more of a trade school. It's not a level of professional where one diagnoses, treats, prescribes. And there was nothing that we could do, in my mind, to rebrand assistant. As much as we tried, it's been 50 years, and people still think, if they don't know us, and this is what WPP said, if they really haven't met a PA, they're much more prone to think that we do what a medical assistant does. And it's interesting, and I would ask you to ask people that you know, especially other healthcare providers, what do you think a PA does? What do you really think a PA actually does? And ask an optometrist or a podiatrist. And after 50 years, most of them don't know what we do. So it's fascinating. And most of them think the physician comes in and finishes the job or tells us something or whatever. So there's even a bit of a trust factor in there, which we all felt, and we didn't know how to say, which WPP pointed out. And the only other part that I'd put in now is we found over the last 2 years going for OTP that legislators now are finding it confusing when we say, yes, we're physician assistants, but we want to be able to do what physicians do. And it's, well, assistants, if I'm assisting someone in Hollywood, I don't produce the movie if I'm the producer's assistant. I don't know anything about producing movies. I know a lot about getting you lunch, and I know a lot about keeping your paperwork and your schedule and everything you're doing intact, so you know the time you spend is valuable to you and you're not wasting it. And that's what I do well. And that's kind of what assistants do well for the people they assist. And we're not doing that. So it's confusing to people, I think. Next slide. Also, it's generic. I see all the time still, someone, physician's assistant, and it's not us, it's a medical assistant or somebody else, or even grandma I see many times obituaries where it says in 1946 to 1964, they were a physician's assistant for Dr. Jones in some town in Idaho. And I'm like, maybe they were, because it's a generic title, but they weren't what I am. So I'm not sure they should be using that, because everybody thinks she went to, a 2-year program and did what we do. So it's a little weird that way also. And then I really, again, believe, because this is my point of view, that we've evolved past what Dr. Stead thought we would be. And again, the original PAs were not supposed to be allowed to diagnose and treat. They were going to gather information, they were going to do the history and physical, and then come back and say, here's what I think the patient has, and a true assistant. We are not that anymore. So with full practice, how can we assist someone we're not required to work with? And even have that name in our title, possibly. So that's where we're at. That's where the profession's at today. I think next slide. That was just, it's one of these memes, but I thought it was funny and I thought it was interesting. What my physician thinks I do, what my friends think I do, what my patients think I do, which I think is the most telling, is that somebody put in that I'm a medical assistant, I'm a receptionist, I'm a sort of a nurse answering the phone. Next slide. And if you just think this is our problem, I thought you'd be interested that here are the countries that PAs work in, and they are basically almost all like us, seriously. And look at the differences even in the names here. Many took our name because we had our educators go there to start the first PA programs. But, and many took our name because of military people who practiced in that country and basically were, role models to start their own, in certain countries, their own PA profession. But it's fascinating, and it's also fascinating to note that the British countries, Ireland, Scotland, and the UK, were associates there also. So it's anything all over the world, from health assistant to clinical officer to physician associate to even medical licensee in Zambia. Next slide. And again, this isn't me, folks. This is our profession talking to us on Facebook. And somebody put this up, and I'm not sure that I even get it, but I get the sentiment. The lady asks him, "You're the physician's assistant?" And he goes, "No, I'm the PA." If someone's assistant is prescribing medicine, you should probably report them, assuming they aren't an MD, PA, or NP on the side. And I think that was a reaction to the physician's assistant thing. Not sure if they would have said physician assistant, if that would have been different, is my point. But it's this whole confusion about, does an assistant do this? And this whole craziness we're sitting in right now. Next slide. In 2016, I just didn't want to leave this out, the AAPA, I was on the board by then, and many board members, we thought for a while at least, just until we can get a handle on where we're going for the future, let's just use PA for now. And yes, people may say, what does PA mean? And we'll have to say what it means, but at least it would take us away. And many of my colleagues, and I think many PAs in general, have gone to using PA when describing who they are and what they do, rather than saying the assistant word. So that was a way to get around using assistant all the time. And we were doing this for a while, and it was working for a while. And I guess that's what held up those few years when we weren't really speaking about it a lot. We were trying this out. Next slide. And this is my closing. I would say, and I just saw this written down somewhere, and it wasn't about a title, But until we find language, and it's not only our title, but certainly our title is a big part of it, that accurately and passionately communicates who we are and I like to say what we do, and that said, what we have to offer, we will continue to feel like we're on a driverless bus to nowhere, because we wind up spending half the time explaining who we are and what we do. And we need a title we can actually brand, and if not even brand, that people understand on a first pass. And I think that's it for now, and I'm gonna leave it up to, I think Lisa's next. So thanks, and we'll do questions and answers later. And I hope again, I didn't bring up anything about medical care practitioner. I didn't want to tell you how I feel in terms of more than saying I believe our title does not represent us well, and the history of other people feeling the same way. There has never been a branch really of the profession that felt that we were adequately served by assistant, at least a majority of us. I can tell you that. And I can also tell you I ran on a platform of title change every time I ran, every time. So I'm going to hand it off to Lisa now. In full disclosure, I gave you everything, and it's up to Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mittman.
You're welcome.
All right, so next is Lisa Gables. Lisa Gables is a certified public accountant and an association executive with extensive experience in healthcare, working in the provider sector as well as for professional associations. She was named Chief Executive Officer of the American Academy of PAs in September 2020 after serving as interim CEO since June 2019. Gables has been with the AAPA since 2012, having served as Chief Financial Officer and Chief Development Officer, as well as the Executive Director of the PA Foundation. She has extensive experience in fostering strategic outcomes, financial and operational management, and business partnership cultivation. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. Let me get to the screen to share. Just 1 second. All right. Is that okay for everyone?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, thanks. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today to speak with us, and we're really interested to hear what you have to say via your questions, which we'll get to at the end. But I wanted to spend a couple of minutes with you talking about the WPP reports that came out and all of the work that was done. Again, this disclaimer here that anything you hear that might seem like opinion is opinion. We're not representing AAPA, we're just sharing the facts here. So I wanted to start by saying that clearly we all are aware that healthcare is changing. It's changing more rapidly than we can keep up with. So in relation to the WPP ask, we wanted them to take a look at what's going on with, as Dave just went through a whole series of how physician assistant is used and what does it mean regarding scope of practice. How does it bear in the market in terms of competition? And then what, the fact that we have no single understanding of what's going on. We have different people thinking it's different things. So they were asked to take a look at this. And in 2018, as Dave alluded to, the House of Delegates actually proclaimed that we should actually hire a firm to take a look at this and try to get a little more in-depth information on what it all meant. So we selected WPP, which is a global marketing, communications, and research firm that specializes in healthcare. This is a little bit about them and all the things that they've done. So they're a very qualified firm. We went through an RFP process and selected them as a result of their, qualifications. The objectives of this project were to empower physician assistants to successfully compete in an ever-changing healthcare marketplace, to boost relevance among key stakeholder groups and evolve the understanding and impact of the profession. So with this process, we worked with them to create a 5-phase learning process. The first phase being discovery, then going on into research and analytics, interpreting what we learned in that research phase into coming up with insights and strategy. The last phase was to actually look at the title itself and create some new options for titles, and then to validate that by going back to the marketplace to see if those titles would resonate or what kind of feedback we would get from them. So as you can see, this process began in October of 2018 and concluded in March of 2020. Had the pandemic not happened, we would have shared this report in May of 2020, but instead we shared it in November. So the first phase, as you might imagine, was all about discovery and designing this so that we could get some of the information. We spent a lot of time. We appointed a TCI advisory council that were made up of a group of PAs unrelated to the boards of any organizations, but just had sort of stakeholders across the industry to try to figure out if we could come up what questions we needed to ask. We also conducted a literature review of relevant industry trends, publications, and other regulations that were out there governing the profession. And we engaged a legal partner to be part of the team at that time. Then we ended up in the next phase looking at research. We really spent a lot of time trying to figure out what questions we wanted to ask, both in qualitative and quantitative research agendas. We interviewed in depth a number of key internal and external stakeholders. And this is sort of a high level look at what we did. We started out with this qualitative research, and we ended up interviewing all of the categories of folks you see there: PAs, PA students, physicians, NPs, employers, think tanks, professional societies, medical boards, government agencies. Later on, we interviewed insurance companies and other types of payers. So it was a very extensive research part of the project. We also did a quantitative research survey where we asked these groups of people to do a 45-minute online survey. You may have actually participated in this survey back then. I'm not sure whether or not any of you did, but just wanted you to know we went as far and wide as we could to get people's understanding. After we did the research from June and July of 2019, we actually analyzed what we came up with, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in just a second. But it took quite a while to analyze all these results, and the good news out of this project is we gained a whole lot of research on things we probably never would have otherwise known about the profession. So it was very informational for us, and we have all of that research now in our hands to do with what we wish. So we're going to not talk about all 10 key findings. For those of you who are members, can actually review the full report, and you can read about each of the findings in depth. But I want to look at a few of them with you today to try to kind of hit home on some of the bigger points. The one overarching message I wanted you to know is that patients, when interviewed, were satisfied with PAs, particularly around what they defined as time and access, meaning here it shows you a little bit about what that means: respectful of time, the increased access to care, which often means faster and easier appointment times, that when you're in a visit with a PA, they do spend sufficient time with you, they fill in information gaps, and they're really building relationships with you as a patient. So this was very good for us to see. I was pleased to see this when it came to people's maybe they didn't know exactly who you were, but they were happy with the work that you did. The other thing here, this is not really a big surprise, but for people who knew who PAs were, the satisfaction rates increased. If they had seen a PA before, knew who a PA was, at least in general, that the scores actually improved. The other thing that happened here, when we first began this process, we created a definition, which is there on the left that says correct definition, and we created some incorrect definitions to use in this research process to find out what would happen if we gave each of these sets of folks these types of definitions to see how they would react. And we'll talk a little bit about this in a second. One might argue as I have heard recently, that maybe this is not the actual correct definition of a PA. But for purposes of this study, it was the one that we used. So last year when we showed this report, it showed that most PAs and PA students identified the correct definition upon showing the first time. So 76% of PAs selected the right definition, 73% of students selected the right definition. So that's good. However, both groups here, it says, saw alignment between the defining of the role and responsibilities of the profession. However, they did not see a fit for the title. So here you can see that while the perception of the role and responsibilities fits the definition, but the title here compared to the 79 and 80% clearly does not. 10% and 3% on the fit between the perception of the roles and responsibilities and the title, and then the definition of the title based on this. 17% of PAs said it doesn't fit, and 9% says, you know, it doesn't fit, or those of people who said it fits, so it's obviously not as high. So there's clearly a disconnect based on the research that was done between the title and the way that the definition and the roles and responsibilities were outlined. So from here, we wanted to see, now we've seen what PAs and PA students think, let's talk about what patients and physicians and employers think about the definitions. So here, the alignment of the physician assistant title and roles and responsibilities prior to seeing those definitions we gave them said, yeah, it looks about right. You know, 86% of the patients said, sure, I don't really know what they do, but I think it makes sense. 84% of physicians and 91% of employers said, yeah, it makes sense. This is prior to us showing them the actual real definition. So here were, again, the definitions that we gave. Again, you might argue this is perhaps not the correct definition, but that's the one we used. So we gave these definitions to those other groups of people and said, what do you think? Here, interestingly enough, 75% of patients, 89% of physicians, and 71% of employers picked the wrong definition, which means that there's still a very big misperception on the roles and responsibilities compared to the title. And most importantly here, you can see the highlighted words of mid-level, and then at the explicit direction of physicians, meaning they're working for physicians as an assistant, is what the third one implies. So clearly incorrect. When they were shown these options, they picked the wrong one. So then we showed them the correct definition and said, now what do you think? So after reading the correct definition, they actually all changed their mind and said, well, you know what? I think the correct definition really does describe it. 85% of patients, 78% of physicians, and 86% of employers said, actually, this new or this more correct definition actually does clearly describe the value that PAs deliver. So once they were shown it, they were still in agreement that this was the right one. So here we've seen that PAs and PA students, you know, in the previous slides, think that the title does not, the research showed that the title does not fit the roles and responsibilities and sort of the value PAs bring. Here, we've just seen that patients, physicians, and employers don't fully understand what really the role and responsibilities of a PA is. The current title did not help drive clarity around the true value of the profession. And this potentially compounds perceptions that physician assistants are mid-level healthcare providers based on all those incorrect definitions that were first selected. So this sort of showed us all the things that Dave had talked about before. We've now seen in a more scientific way and with statistically valid, you know, information that what we've always thought is true. So then what we decided to do was say, all right, now let's think about using what we've learned in the quantitative and the qualitative interviews. Let's talk about the drivers of what value really means. Let's look at the dimensions of what creates perceived value in among healthcare in all the categories we've talked about: PA, students, patients, physicians, and employers. And so we started out with this really big list of attributes that we believed were driving healthcare value for PAs. So you can see them all here. There's a whole lot of things. I won't read them to you. And if you want more detail, the report has all of this. And it basically clustered them as we say here, WPP put these into various dimensions of value. So a lot about time, relationships, trust, are they part of the team, they're delivering quality service, etc. And then they further refined them down into the top three that were shown through the research, that patient experience, quality, and access to care were the highest values that could be placed in healthcare for PAs. Not a big surprise. When those were tested, though, the number one thing that came out was patient experience. And so all the way across the board, patient experience was the highest of the three. So quality and access came in lower than the actual experience the patient had. When you compared what everyone else said about this, interestingly enough, that PAs, students, physicians, and employers all thought the same thing. That patient experience was very high in the marks of how to do this. The only one that came in higher is physician actually thought access was higher than patient experience, but there wasn't that big of a difference, 35 to 47% here. I would say they're fairly equal when it comes to this. The other thing I'll point out is the employer category. We added affordability in addition to access. So there was actually being able to have an appointment to see someone versus could I afford to see someone. That was added in the employer segment. So we felt our takeaway from this really was time, relationships, and care in the patient experience was something we sort of honed in on and really tried to analyze a little bit more. And it really did drive at the end were thoughts around how to brand the profession and later on how to think about titles. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Here was a little bit more into what does time mean. Time to the patient means you're spending sufficient time with me. Relationships, you're building rapport and you're being respectful of my time as a patient. And then the care is you're providing consistent and quality levels of care. So these were the top areas that they ranked here as overall. And then PAs, when we asked them the same questions, do you think that you're doing this? Are you spending sufficient time? Are you building relationships and being respectful of time? And are you providing consistent and high quality level of care? You thought that you were. So PAs thought that they were a little bit lower on the patient side, but still some things that you felt were of value. So there was a whole lot more research, and I do encourage you to take a look at the whole report to see it. But I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes on how we got to the final phase of this. And I want to also be clear that if you looked at a pie chart and said, break out all the time that we spent on all this research and all these, key findings and conclusions and strategies and things like this, I would say that 90% of the work was done in that area and about 10% was done of time in the work exploring titles. So just keep that in the back of your mind. So we started out, as you might imagine, WPP did, with this huge list of titles. It was somewhere in the neighborhood of 250, I believe. And we went through sort of crafting objectives on what we wanted a title to, how it to represent. And then we started to narrow down from there. We went through a series of critiques and evaluations against the ultimate goals. And the final part of this was to examine for legal and usage checks by our attorney. So in other words, we couldn't violate any trademarks that already existed. We couldn't violate common usage language or acronym usage that was already in place. So we went through this huge drill down process, if you will, and tested it through with the TCI stakeholder group as we went through, just to make sure we were on the right track. And so these were the top 3 that went into the final validation. So physician associate, which you've heard a lot before, medical care practitioner, and this new word called praxitian. There were a whole lot of rationale behind why each of those things were chosen. And the next stage of the process was not to send out a survey to everybody to say, pick one. What happened next was we wanted to go through part of the process of validating each title was to ask you in and of itself whether or not you felt the title represented the profession. It defined clearly the roles and the values of the profession. So you weren't pitting against each other, but you were evaluating them on their own as a standalone process. So here, in this case, the title was shown that physician focuses on the high level of our medical relationship. Associate suggests working closely with others in the professional capacity, and the acronym is PA. There was a lot of conversation about this title because one of the things we learned in the research was some confusion exists because you define yourself as it relates to another profession. So whether the title is associate or assistant, you're clearly latching yourself to another profession. So does that actually meet the goals that you want to have? To try to change the paradigm of who PAs are. So that was a criticism of this title. Obviously, I think associate is a better word than assistant in this from what we learned, but still you're defining yourselves in relation to another person. The medical care practitioner was here stated that medical establishes us firmly in the category, care indicates our purpose in direct, simple terms, and practitioner suggests a hands-on expertise, and the acronym would be MCP. This was, we went through a series of different third words like medical care provider, medical care associates. I mean, we had a lot of different things for that third word. We landed on practitioner, I believe, ultimately because it was a commonly accepted word, especially in the term nurse practitioner. So it would set us apart from nurse practitioners in the sense of being medical care and identifying with the medical model of which you're trained in. But it was common enough that if people knew who a nurse practitioner was, medical care practitioner was not a big leap. So that's how this was derived. And the last one, praxitian, this was WPP's attempt at complete redefinition of the profession. And this firm represents companies like Nike and really large retail type companies, and their experience in redefining products and services for companies led them to the path of showing us this, because once you make up a name, you have the whole world to define it. You belong, it belongs to you, no one else, and you define it how you want it to be. At the end of the day, after doing the research, this title was not selected, but I want you to see here that who did we hear from when we validated the title? About 21,000 PAs, 6,100 students, about 400 patients, 100 physicians, and about 200 employers, all of whom knew who a PA was. So we picked people who knew who they were to sort of look at these 3 different things independent of each other and try to decide which one made sense to them. And ultimately, as we see here, a physician associate is seen to more closely align with the definition that we currently have of physician assistant and students. All other audiences, meaning patients, providers, physicians, and employers, actually believed medical care practitioner more closely aligned with the definition and value, and no one thought praxitian aligned. So this was, again, to remind you what the definitions were that we used when we suggested these 3 be evaluated. At the end of the day, WPP made a recommendation that medical care practitioner would be the best title opportunity for the profession if we were going to change it for these reasons. Its perceived meaning is a positive starting point and will likely require less investment in testing the role than other titles that were tested. The strength lies in the usage of real world common language, and it's what it lacks in brevity makes up for communication value and ease of use. Since this is common language in your space, you won't have to work to define it on your own, and it doesn't seem generic. And connotations of this being a support role can be mitigated by messaging through experience, and the title that already comes to mind, i.e. nurse practitioner. So their final words here: overall, this title can signal a change and is aligned with the positioning and goals for the profession to tell the right story from launch. So that is, I believe, my last slide. So I will stop there. And I will stop sharing my screen. That's all I had, John.
Great, thank you, Lisa. So next is going to be Dr. Stephen Lewia. And Stephen Lewia is an emergency medicine PA who practices at a critical access hospital in Meade, Kansas. He's also a flight paramedic in Kansas, flying in both fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters. Prior to moving to Kansas last year, he completed an emergency medicine fellowship at Arrowhead Medical Center in Colton, California. While there, he also completed his Doctor of Medical Science degree from the University of Lynchburg. Dr. Lewia has been involved in PA advocacy and leadership since PA school. During his didactic year, he represented the student voice in the AAPA House of Delegates as a student delegate. He then went on to serve 2 years on the AAPA Student Academy Board of Directors as the president-elect and president. During his time as Student Academy president, he represented the student voice on the AAPA's Board of Directors as student director. Seeing a need for an early career PA voice on the board, Dr. Lewia ran for and was elected to a 2-year term as director at large on the board, where he currently is finishing his first term. In his free time, which rarely occurs, he likes to spend time with his girlfriend, who is a trauma critical care PA in Wichita, Kansas. Whenever you're ready, Dr. Lewia.
Great, thank you so much. Can you guys see the presentation or my notes?
We can see both. I think if you go up to display settings and the first, yep.
Darn. Okay. Okay, so thank you guys so much for having me. I'm being previously on the Student Academy Board. It's so exciting for me to have students interested in what's going on from a professional standpoint. So I'm ecstatic to be able to help give you guys some perspective and maybe some guidance. So we're going to talk about 3 different parts of the AAPA report that was released. And first, we're going to start with advocacy. Advocacy, we look towards different stakeholders with relevance to advocacy. So this could be constituent organizations, so states, but also specialty organizations, federal agencies. So think about like the VA, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, and then also employers. So either small employers or big employers. And then talk to them about the cost, the feasibility, how is this actually going to work if we are to change the name. So we started with the states. The states, if you think about it, I mean, APA can tomorrow say, or HOD could say, hey, we're going to change the name, but it's going to come down to the states and each state's responsibility to change that name and the legislator and then statutes and everything that they have. So a couple things that we identified is that, one, it's going to happen at different rates, but consistency is going to be the key. Part of this, we could be using what's called deeming language. So it's deeming language or deeming position or provision is where you explicitly state how something is going to be treated or regarded. So for example, if we decided to change the name to X-A12, which is Elon Musk's new kid's name, we could have some deeming language that calls us X-A12 and say that, well, whenever you see this, this actually means PA. So hopefully that was more of a joke. But for example, we could input a section into law, statute, regulation, etc., that whenever within the thousands of pages of statute you see the word PA, it actually means MCP or physician associate or something else. So we have options to changing the name.
I'm sorry, Stephen, really quick with your presentation, I believe everyone views your slides as if they're a little bit zoomed in, so they can't see the whole thing. Do you mind kind of escaping your view to try to reset that and see if that works?
Absolutely. How about now?
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. There's also telemedicine considerations. As we saw with the pandemic, people obviously didn't want to go to their provider's office. So telemedicine became a huge thing for the better. And that's great. But the problem, if you will, a problem with it is that it often occurs across state lines. And so if we have one state that has maybe PA and another state that still hasn't got to that point, there might be implications for how that works that might change reimbursement provisions and stuff like that. So just another consideration that we have now that we have telemedicine, now that it's become a very big part of the medical community. Something else we considered was liability. We found that there's no anticipated increased liability if we actually change our title. But that being said, it's important, just like you are aware that informed consent is important, we do need to be aware that we are telling our patients, hey, this is who we are as a provider. We are not a physician, we are not a nurse practitioner, we're also not a medical assistant. So that comes with being a provider in general, and you will definitely learn that if you haven't already, how that's very important. And then it comes to this federal level. There is 75 mentions in US code, which is law. And then within the government, there's something called the CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations. And this is within the executive branches where we actually make more fine, minute details on what is done. There's over 180 mentions of the word physician assistant. So this is going to be something that needs to be addressed. It's not clear on how we're going to make that change. The cool thing about the CFRs is that we could make those sometimes without any kind of congressional changes, or we can go big and go make congressional changes that kind of come down from the top and make all the changes to the CFRs. So we have options. When we're talking about national stakeholders, these are a couple I've already mentioned, and things that I talked about the government. I also didn't mention the Indian Health Service, but also we have to consider the commercial payers. So when you have your Blue Cross Blue Shield or United Healthcare card, what does that mean to them? Major health systems we talked about, and I talked about constituent organizations. Now, diving a little deeper into constituent organizations, part of that research, we did look into state chapters, federal service chapters, specialty organizations, interest groups, and we got their opinion as well to see, hey, what is it going to look like if we change our name? How is this going to cost? How is it going to be feasible? So I bring this up just to say that we didn't just say, hey, we're going to change the name and we're going to just hope that everybody can do it. We really did look and do our due diligence to make sure that this was feasible and to allow the House of Delegates to make an informed decision. And I'll kind of talk more about that in a second. We have a bunch of different questions like, hey, well, it could be as big as like changing the name, but what's it going to cost? What's it going to look like when you have to update your printed materials, when you have to change your brands, your logos and things like that. So we really tried to get as deep as possible to make sure that everybody has a good understanding of what is this going to look like cost-wise, feasibility-wise. And I just wanted to kind of present some other questions and considerations. So we do need to think about how the title's protected. So we can't just change the title and then find out that a 12-year-old kid already has the patent for it and we have to pay this 12-year-old kid because he already took that name. We have to make sure that it's protected so that nobody can take the name and say to try to change it. We have to be careful that when we are changing the name, we're not showing to anybody that we're changing who we are. We're not changing what our scope of practice is. We are changing our brand and our title, but that doesn't necessarily change who we are. And we don't want to make sure that there's no trade-offs between advancement in the profession that we see on a state level and on national levels and changing the name. We would really like to be able to do both at the same time, but there's possible implications to maybe some states can only do one thing or the other, and same with the national level. And then for this number 4, opening the Federal Social Security Act and State Practice PA Act, I don't know if you're aware of it, but there are people out there, provider groups that really do not like us. They are actively against us. And in some states, they petition to be against PAs or nurse practitioners. So what the last thing we want to do, we don't want to open the book and people start saying, oh, since everything's open now, let's start changing and getting rid of PA's scope of practice, or let's make them change them back to that assistant that we think that they should be. So these are all just considerations that we have considered and are presented to the HOD delegates so that they can make, again, informed decisions. A couple more is credibility test. Is this credible? If we turned and changed our name to the X-Ash, whatever it was, we might not be credible anymore. So that's something we do have to consider. And we have to think about, is this worth the time to do it? We also, we just hopefully finished a pandemic, a national public health crisis, one of the many that are occurring. Is it the right time to do it? Is it a benefit, number 7, to the state and federal legislators? So when we come to a state legislator, we are normally presenting with, hey, we are fixing an option for you guys. There is a health crisis with providers. There's not enough providers or X, or, hey, I can't prescribe diabetic shoes. Here's how we are coming to help. But coming to change the name might not present to these individuals as something that's really worth a heavy lift for them. So it's something to consider. We have to think about practice like we talked about, and how this is going to work with the government entities, like we said. Okay, this is where I really start to geek out and get excited, because this, if you look back to what has been presented so far, there's definitely a branding issue. And first, let's talk about brand. So the brand is not just a name, okay? When I say the word Nike or Coca-Cola or Verizon or something like that, you see that name, but you know what that represents. You know that Nike, think about like a Red Bull. I mean, Red Bull is not a can of like high energy caffeinated drink. Red Bull is like excitement and motocross and all that other things. So that is a brand, and that's something that we are struggling with. And as the previous presenters show, that there's a inconsistency with what our brand is. So what I get excited about being on the current board, and hopefully in the future, is that we can create a brand that is much more people understand better, and hopefully we'll have a title that more easily is like, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. I know exactly what you do. And then also a brand as a platform for action. So I'm going to read from the slide. I hate that, but through communications and action, it embodies the value you bring to the world and the relationships you form with patients, physicians, employers, and all other external stakeholders. So there's so much more than a name. So how are we going to change the brand of our profession? We have 3 phases that we kind of have looked into. The first phase is planning and development, and that's going to take a little while, but we want to make sure that we're doing it right. And we're going to bring in outside resources to make sure that, hey, this is kind of out of our wheelhouse. We don't do branding. That's not our, this is not what we do on a daily basis. Let's get some of, like we use for WPP, let's get somebody with expert experience on this, bring them in to help us with this. Phase 2 will be internal execution. So this is at AAPA, how are we fixing things at the AAPA level? And then external execution, this is brand awareness to the general public, to stakeholders, communication deliverables for our priority audiences, such as patients and physicians, stuff like that. And then tactics, how are we actually going to present this brand? So through advertising, media relations, things like that. Just a quick slide on Our timeline, this is just kind of an expected, it should take us once, if it is chosen that we will change the name, about 6 months to get that planning and development underway, about a year for the internal execution of that brand. And then phase 3 will start at the same time, will at least be a year, but will definitely be longer than that, because we're going to continue to remind people of our new brand and to continue to work to support that. So it all comes down to money. Let's talk about the financial analysis that was done to make sure that, again, we are making an informed decision on this. And we talked about in this slide, or the next couple slides, we'll talk about a couple of key groups or areas where we will need to put money in. So the the federal agencies, commercials, the state chapter lobbying. So when you want something to get done at a state or national level, you have lobbyists to help you do that. I know for me personally, before I got into all this, lobbying to me was like a bad thing, but it's actually a very good thing, but it requires money. This is how you get things changed on a state and national level. The model state legislation, this is where we're actually working with the states to change their legislative, how we're helping them change their legislative, like when they're creating new legislation, their drafting of it and analysis of it. And then number 5 is personnel, the collateral, the political action committee, which we'll talk about in a second. So if you read the actual, or if you look at this presentation when it's presented by Lisa, I believe at the HOD, you'll see actual numbers. And I was hesitant to put real numbers here, because if I told you right now that I want you as a PA student to donate $20,000 to change X, that's a lot of money to you. So if I put up $1 million, that might seem like a lot of money to you, but in the context of all of these different situations and organizations, in the context of APA in general, might not mean as much. So I'm just kind of broke it down into dollar signs. So if you see a $1 sign, that's obviously just $1 sign versus $2 signs versus a $0.50 sign versus $20 signs. And the reason I put this up is, again, to show examples. So commercial payers, we're going to be working with them, but we think that we can put a little bit of money in it, have a good return. Where we're going to see a lot of money in a support is lobbying to get these names changed on the state levels, and send a good amount of money for changing their legislation, help them draft them. It's very political, it's very strategic, and it takes some time and money to figure that out. And then personnel collateral. And I also wanted you to see how this occurs over time. And this is a 5-year plan that we're looking at. And moving on, we're also going to need to change our technology. Obviously, if we change our name to a different name, we might not go to www.aapa.org. It might have to be something else. Although those logos might have to change, stuff like that. So that will cost money, obviously, but it's not something crazy. So I'm going back to that dollar sign. This is like $1.50, if you will. And that we could probably change in about a year, and that's okay. Operations, this is our day-to-day stuff. This is the documents. This is our letterhead, all that stuff. Legally, we have to reapply for a different title of our corporation and things like that. And that's also something that we can probably get down in the first year or two. It's going to cost a good amount of money, but it could happen within it, like I said, a year or two. And then branding, rebranding, new title, brand activation. This is where we're really starting to change some of those bigger things. And this is where some of that major money comes around. So pre-planning, this is what we talked about as phase 1 is our pre-planning. And then I'll just kind of let you take a look at this. I mean, phase 2, this is where we're talking about our internal branding at APA. And then phase 3 is our external. And this is where we're getting into some serious numbers or dollar signs to make sure that we are doing this effectively. And as you can see, it takes course over time. So we might start initially pretty low with year 1, but we're going to ramp it up. And this is all done very strategically to ensure that we are getting the best bang for our buck, to really make sure that everybody understands what our new brand is. So add it all up, that's a lot of dollar signs. But as you can see, 2 things I wanted to show you is that this occurs over time. So we don't have to throw down $1 billion right now to get this done, or $1 billion signs, if you will. It occurs over time, but it is a significant portion of, or a significant amount of money to change this brand. So what's next? So I saw a couple questions about this already. So who's going to change this? How is this actually going to happen? Well, it's the House of Delegates. So the APA, I explain it like this. The APA is broken into an executive branch, if you will, and then a legislative branch. The HOD is the legislative branch, and they actually do much more than, say, the legislative branch of the United States. They actually get stuff done. They will be the sole authority in general, they are the sole authority to enact policies that for the collective values, philosophies, and the principles of the profession. So it is their job, it has been bestowed to them for their job to, if we're going to change something like this, it comes from them. Within the House of Delegates, each delegate comes from states there's actually a really large student delegation and different specialty organizations, constituent organizations. They will come together and they will submit, they could possibly submit resolutions to say, hey, we want to change the name to X or Y, and they will mull it over and they will perhaps vote to change the name. Could this not happen this year? I guess it's possible. It's not my job. It's not AAPA, the board's job. This is solely given to the House of Delegates to make this decision, and it's kind of up to them. So what is the board's role? So like I said, it's the legislative branch is the House of Delegates. The executive branch is the board of directors in the APA. Our job is to directly manage the direct management of the organization, organizational policies, and really the big one, the direct the financial affairs. So the HOD could say, hey, for example, for this title change initiative, the HOD says, we want you to look into a new title. And so that came to the board, and the board put some money, a lot of money down, and said, okay, we will hire a firm. We will do this objectively. We actually stood out of it. We said, I don't want to be involved because I want to remain as objective as possible. And we made sure that that happened. So potentially, if there is a name change, that's going to come to the board of directors, and it's going to be then our responsibility to make sure that it's done and done well. It is possible that the board, the HOD could say, hey, do something, and the board could say, you know what, this is not actually feasible at this time. So that's a possibility. I could speak for myself as a board member, as my opinion is that if the HOD says, hey, I want to do this, I'm going to find out how we're going to do it. We're going to get this done, because that's the profession telling the board we want this done. So in my opinion, if HOD says, hey, we're going to change the name to XYZ, we're going to figure out a way to get it done and get it done effectively. So if it is passed, it goes to the board, and we assess what they say here, the prudence and feasibility of the decision. And we will come back with a report to the House of Delegates for the recommendation. We're going to come back and say, yep, all right, we're going to get this done. We're going to roll up our sleeves and get this done. And we also will consider other organizations that are intimately related to this decision, like PAEA, which is the educational branch of the profession, NCCPA, this is when you go to take your boards and later take your PANRE, and then the ARC-PA, which accredits PA programs. So that was AAPA slide. I'm going to put two of my, or maybe three of my own opinions in, and this is my next steps. And again, this is my own opinion. So how can you as a student make a difference? Well, it's to be a voting participant in this decision, you had to have been part of the student delegation for this upcoming year, if this decision is made in this upcoming year. So that's already come and gone. You can't apply for next year, which I highly encourage you to do. That's how I got involved. My first thing with national leadership was I just heard about this HOD thing, and I applied as a student, and I became a student delegate. So that is possible. It's late now. That's okay. There's so much you can do. And the first is to be what's called a brand ambassador. We are going to come out with a brand if we change the name. And it's imperative that the biggest group of people that are making this brand known are PAs, or whatever our name turns out to be. So how can you be a brand ambassador? You can actually start now by first not saying mid-level provider. This is a 4-letter word to me. It makes my skin crawl. 2 days ago, I actually corrected a paramedic about this, and I constantly am working on my wording to make sure that I don't come off like a jerk, because I hate it, because I am in a critical access hospital, and at night, I'm the only one there. So when a person comes in and needs a chest tube, I'm putting the chest tube. And let me tell you, I'm not putting it in mid-levelly or whatever. I'm also a flight paramedic. So I constantly am flying into these rural hospitals, and we bring them to higher level of care. But let me tell you, if I picked up that patient from a physician, a really good physician, and bringing them to a higher level of care, one could say that that initial physician was providing mid-level or lower level of care, but you would never say that. So why are we saying that to ourselves? We do not provide mid-level care. We provide high quality evidence-based medicine. So you see that, say something, see something, say something. We are also not assistants. You do not hear me say physician assistant, I say PA. And if somebody wants to know what a PA is, I will break it down. And my little spiel is I'm a physician assistant, but I actually hate the word assistant because I don't assist anybody. I provide high quality medical care that is evidence-based. We are responsible for the care that we provide. Your state that you are in legislatively, you might not be, okay? And that's where we're at right now. But think about this. I want you to get in your head as you're going through school, at no point in your algorithm of, okay, patients in cardiac arrest, first thing I need to do is start chest compressions. Next is I need to see if it's a VFib, VTAC, or PEA, or it's just nowhere in that algorithm should be, oh, I have to call for the physician. Now, granted, it should be, I need to call for somebody more qualified than me, could be a PA, nurse practitioner, but you are making the call. At the school that I went to, no point was it, okay, stop at this line here and then call for somebody else. You are responsible. So whatever call you are making, you should get in your head that this is your call, not anybody else's call. You can't go back and say, oh, well, I didn't know, so I don't know, blame it on somebody else. You make the call. So if you start getting that into your head, that might not be occurring on a legislative level, and some state might actually say that whatever care you're providing, it's only done at the direction of somebody else. Don't think about that. Think about you are it. All of this being said, you got to be strategic about it, especially as a new PA. I deal with this all the time, and I've learned there's a time and a place for everything. So if you're talking with the chief medical officer, physician person, and they're dropping mid-level provider every other sentence, it might not be the right time right then and there to educate them. But I encourage you to be strategic about it so that you can make a lasting impact. The CEO that hired me at the current hospital that I'm at, she used to drop it all the time. And I finally, obviously not during my interview, didn't bring it up, but slowly started to educate her, and she doesn't use the term anymore. Stay informed. I would encourage you to watch the HOD this year. It's probably going to come up, this name change thing. Ask questions, but also get multiple opinions. I've already answered a couple questions on the Q&A, but I'm very careful to say this is my opinion, and not because I'm on the board or anything, but there's multiple ways to skin a cat. And you'll see that in medicine all the time, that one person will say, you have to give this medicine for this, and another person will say the exact opposite. The same is with how we're going about all of this, is that you need to get multiple opinions. And that is how you make informed decisions. You allow your patients to make informed decisions. So you should be making informed decisions. And I will say, and this might ruffle some feathers, but if you're only getting your opinions from your professors, I would challenge you on that, because they are one opinion. And if they say they're the only opinion, well, granted, they are when it comes to your grade, but everything outside of grades, challenge that. And obviously, time and a place, but they're not the only opinion. I'm not the only opinion. You need to take in multiple opinions and make your own decision, make your own informed decision. And that's how we're going to move things forward. If we all just come out of school and say, whatever my professor said is exactly how I do it, we are not critically thinking. We are not a critically thinking profession at that point. I'm not saying what the professors are saying are bad. It's usually probably pretty good. Lastly, advocate for your profession. So the involvement comes in many forms. So you can be doing what I'm doing. You can be at a national level. You could be at a state level. You could be at a local level, but you're on maybe a committee or leadership. Get involved somehow. There's somewhere where you can get involved. This does mean that you're going to do something that you don't get paid for. I'm on the board of directors for APA. I don't get paid a cent for this, but it's something that I've chosen to do for the profession. You can do something, even minusculely, but you should commit yourself to do something to advance your profession. With regards to advocacy, this is a requirement, and it's not often stated in school that it's a requirement, but it really is. Because honestly, if you're not doing it, nobody else is going to do it for you. If you're not at the table, you are on the menu. We see this all the time with our profession, is that we sometimes get left out of something and we're like, oh, I didn't get involved with this. And it's like, well, we didn't step up we didn't come to the table. So you as students, you need to commit yourself now to doing something that you don't get paid for in order to progress your profession, and you need to advocate. Again, that could come at a state level, come at a national level. I encourage you to look into the Leadership and Advocacy Summit. It's already happened this year, but that's where you go on a national level. You go to Alexandria in Washington, D.C., and you advocate for something to push the profession forward. And if at nothing else, put money towards the Political Action Committee. Okay, this is a group within the AAPA that is kind of separate from it, but this is where going back to the lobbyists. I know that's like a hateful word, but that's how we get things done. And so that should be part of who we are when you come out of school, when you make $150,000, maybe not the first year, maybe the second year, maybe the third year, but when you're making a lot of money, you need to be putting money forward to progress your profession by supporting the PAC, or Political Action Committee. Boom. And that is my section. Thank you, guys.
Hello, I just want to thank you, Stephen, and thanks to all the presenters for taking their time to put together some presentations and answer some of the questions already. I would also like to take some time to thank the student leaders from the various PA programs for meeting multiple times over the past several months to put this together. With that being said, we are now going to proceed to the question and answer portion. As you can see from it, there has already been some questions answered by some of the panelists, but there are some open questions as well. Continue to do so. And now I believe John has given permission for attendees to raise their hand, and we will be able to allow you to actually speak if you would like to personally ask a question versus typing it in the Q&A portion. Is that correct, John? Yeah, good.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, good. So if you don't raise your hand, we will proceed with starting with some of the questions, the open questions in the chat. So I think we'll probably do this by the time they were asked. So I think the last question is from Jesse. So as far as timeline, the 2021 HOD would be the next major turning point if one of the three panelists would like to answer that.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you for addressing that, Lisa. And now, are there any other questions in the general chat or in the attendees list?
Yeah, there's one in here from Ryan addressed this to Stephen. I think it would be an advantageous time for us to change the name by pointing to success stories like New York. I'm assuming that's in terms of the COVID response and the pandemic response. And Ryan, you can raise your hand and correct me if I'm wrong, but I take that as, you know, pushing for name change and potentially OTP.
I would just say that, I mean, what we're seeing in New York is a great example. Somebody in a previous question asked something about the autonomy that is seen in the military. That's another great example. I think what we really need, we need to put all of these examples together and remind ourselves of the great work that we do. And this needs to be part of the brand going forward to show that we are highly capable, necessary parts of the team to progress the healthcare of America, which we know needs some help. So I completely agree, Ryan. And that is a big part, but part of the big story.
Really quick, Ryan, you did raise your hand. Did you want to talk and raise your hand again? Just Yeah, okay. You can unmute and yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I guess my follow-on question to be showing like success stories in New York and then also in the military where PAs do have been given that latitude to work a bit more separate from physicians. How can we also start kind of pushing against the narratives that the AMA is pushing out, and then I think it's the PPP, the Patient Protective Program, is some new program I read that's like really pushing against PAs and MPs being given relaxed guidelines and kind of pushed away from physician direct supervision. Would any of the panel members be able to say how we could better advocate against what seems to be like a really dangerous mindset that seems to be in some physicians' heads about allowing for competent PAs to be given more latitude when we've seen success stories during the pandemic and then also in the military where it's much more common?
I'll just say two quick things because I know Dave and probably Lisa too have want to talk about this. One, haters are always going to hate. Okay, when you become more popular, you're going to have these people that are starting to pop up. So you either rise up or you don't. And so we need to rise up and show all of these examples that you're talking about, Ryan, to show that, hey, we are not what you guys are saying we are. So rise up, and haters are going to hate.
Well, yeah, I would agree fully with Stephen, and probably add a little bit more in that as long as we allow someone else to define who we are and what we do, and I just don't mean our title, then we're not a real profession yet. And so you've joined a half profession. When you're allowed to define who you are, what you do, and this is all about OTP, folks. So if you don't know a lot about OTP, go learn about it, because it's really about the final stages of forming a real profession. And if you look up a profession, professions have boards that regulate themselves. They don't have other people regulating them. Professions make up their own cultures, is a better word for it. So we're going to have to make up a culture that determines how we advance after we graduate. So physicians did it on a residency level. So you're going to hear a lot about at the practice level, okay? And that's what we're trying to do now. We're trying to determine the next steps we take as a profession. Most professions for the last 70 or 80 years have graduated people. And so look at nursing, look at pharmacy. Yeah, there's residencies and things, but generally you graduated, and at the practice level, you kept learning and learning and learning, and there was a way for you to show people what you've learned, and you progressed. So you didn't run the cardiac ICU as an RN the first day you graduated nursing school. You progressed to that. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do what all other professions did and have done. And we're going to learn that progression thing. And I don't believe that it can be done before you have to do it. I think we have to learn it. It's just like driving a car. It's just like learning how to dance, just like doing it, interviewing, anything else that you want to do, we have to do it and learn it for ourselves and learn it what works for us. So I would say the first thing we can't do is let other people define who we are, what we do, and even listen to them. So PPP and all these other physicians are saying things basically because they're threatened. And if you're threatened, God bless you, be threatened. Don't take it out on me. And we have to continue to do what we do and advance our profession, or it will not be good for us in the future. And so I don't think we have a choice. We have to keep advancing. Everyone else in healthcare is advancing. Pharmacists basically are the #1 injectors in the world now for COVID and every other disease. And 10 years ago, pharmacists didn't even give shots. So, you know, everyone's advancing and we have to advance, and we're competent and we're good and we know we can do it. And I think we're leaving out that there already are 3 states where PAs have full practice, where we don't need to be tethered to a physician. And I think you need to look at OTP also, because part of OTP is that we will work, not will, but that we prefer to work as part of a team, because we truly believe that being part of a team offers better medical care. And I believe that if you're autonomous, independent, OTP, whatever word you want to use, you are a stronger member of the team than someone who's dependent. Just think of those words, dependent. I need someone else to be my best. Well, if you need someone else to be your best, you're not the strongest member of the team. If you can be your best being yourself and keep learning, you add much more to that team. So that's where we're going. I'm not worried about all those people, although sometimes we need to keep an eye on everybody. And I think we're on the right trajectory. I think you guys get that I personally believe our title has a lot to do with all of the snipes people take on us, because it's a misunderstood title. And at the end of the day, that's part of the problem that we're going to have to look at. And we're looking at it now, and we'll see what happens. You know, I think a question we need to ask ourselves, and a really honest question, is what happens if we don't change it? Which I have opinions on. I will not say those opinions, but you know, clearly, there's not everything is about money, and not everything is about time. Some things just have to be done, like OTP. We got to a point and we said, we have to do this. There really was no turning back, and there is no turning back, and thank God it's working. And thank God we were right. And I think we're going to do fine. So my takeaway message on all this is, let's worry about our patients and ourselves and our profession. Let's support our profession. Let's support the AAPA. Let's support our states. I'm being really serious. And as Stephen said, if you walk away and you graduate and you're not involved, it really hurts all of us, and patient care, because by us being involved in patient care, it really strengthens American patient care and international patient care, actually. And so the more involved you can be, the better it is. And if it's only by joining, well, that's great too. So I'm getting off my soapbox. Thanks, everybody. It was really cool. And, you know, get involved and stay involved, and that's it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. Out of interest of time, we'll be moving on to the next texted question, and then I'll let Ryan ask his or her question after that. So the next question we have here, was WPP the right research firm for the title change investigation? Nike worked with a firm that specializes in healthcare. Would AAPA work with WPP again for an investigation of this size? Whoever would like to unmute and respond.
So I can answer that question. We did a full RFP when we decided to do this investigation, and I would say hands down, WPP was the right firm to choose for this. While they represent a lot of large companies, Nike being an example of one, they do represent a lot of healthcare companies as well. So that was part of the decision. Will we use them again in the future? I don't know. That will be up to you know, what the next steps might be.
Thank you. So now I'm going to allow Ryan Wire to talk. You can unmute yourself now. Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Another Ryan here. So throughout this presentation, we talked about methods for name change, particularly in the context of both federal and state governments, as well as PA orgs and other medical groups. But what about patients? What kind of strategies will be utilized for name change advertising for patients?
So I can start. in what you saw as part of this is the branding campaign. The branding campaign that whether we change the title or not, we have learned that there is a problem with branding this profession. So we will move forward with branding probably irrespective of whether the title is changed or not. And one of the strategies for this is directly patient-facing advertising, work on, you probably, if you saw the whole report, you saw that the big sort of pinnacle of branding is human care. And that is something we'll use as a starting point. And there will be absolutely direct to patient kinds of messages regarding this.
Okay, great, thank you. Moving on to the next question. What, if any, impact does the NP push for independent practice have on our name change?
I'll answer that one. Pretty much, it's a hard question, and I'll tell you why. Because it's multifactorial, it's multi-layered. In one way, we're competing with a bunch of other clinicians who do the same thing. And if we had full practice in all 50 states, I think we would look at nurse practitioners in a different way. We would even look at physicians in a different way. And we would be forming groups with them. We would invite the podiatrist in. We'd probably invite a psychologist in or a social worker. I think we're more holistic in that way. And today, unfortunately, there's two things happening. If people think you're an assistant, so let me give you a story, because I think the story illustrates it. So I go to an internist, and my internist is a really nice lady, and I couldn't find anyone that had a PA in my area, or I tend to want to go to places that have PAs, by the way. I think you all should also. We need to support each other. It's one thing we don't even talk about that we should be doing. But I went to my internist, really nice lady. She's a DO. 6 months after I start going, and I only went like once or twice, she has a nurse practitioner. And I said to her, we're in the room alone, just she and I said, why'd you hire an NP? And she said, well, I needed somebody who was more of a colleague and not an assistant. So what did she see? She didn't know PAs well. She saw in a nurse practitioner someone who would take the burden off her back, whatever burden that was, and would be another colleague in her office, just by hearing our name. Because it wasn't about meeting us, it wasn't about our training, it wasn't about working with us. I would tend to think not, but by hearing our name, she negated who we were and what we did because it was an assistant. So in my reality, that's a problem. And that's a problem regarding if we're going to go against NPs. NPs are seen as independent and able to take over and do things physicians previously did. Many physicians, and it came out in the WPP report, see us, and many administrators see us as assistants, whatever that means to them. Some of them see us obviously as doing the same things physicians do, but some of us don't. And that's the problem. So it's multi-level, our NPs, do they have something to do with it? Yes, only because we're all looking towards the same place and the same hospital systems to make decisions about us that we have no control over. So if we can change our title or do anything to elevate the status of our profession, so even full practice is another thing that takes those barriers away, whether they're perceived barriers or real barriers. We're easier to employ. There's less hassle, or you feel, if you're a private individual, that I can get a PA and I will take that monkey off my back. But so it's all intermeshed, and I hope that helps. But it's not one thing, it's everything. And Stephen, how would you feel about that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think, and this confused me as a student. And when I was a student, we were talking about OTP. I actually got to vote for OTP in Las Vegas a couple of years ago, which was kind of cool. But the whole term of independence is weird. When you hear independence, you think of colonial Williamsburg and independent, like being separated, and so it's an English thing that we're dealing with. We're not calling for colonial Williamsburg. We're calling for just being responsible for the care that we provide. Does that mean independent? In some definitions, yes. Does it mean it's what the nurse practitioners are doing? In some states, yes. But there's so many politics and so many details that it gets very difficult to understand. And as a student, I challenge you. This is another perfect example of where you got to get multiple opinions and multiple data sources to make your own opinion on what it means. In my personal opinion, I would like to be responsible for the care that I provide. Does that mean independence? That's up for debate. What do the nurse practitioners do? Again, it changes from state to state, and it's a little different. And so it's hard to put a finger down. And that's a buzzword that if you get some of those groups to hear that you said the word independence, they're throwing up red flags. So it's like, is it worth doing that? I don't know. But yeah, I'll stop.
Great, thank you. So we had another question that was in there that was regarding OTP. I think we're gonna not ask that question, as it can go into kind of a whole nother issue, being OTP. The report itself, which is posted to AAPA, has a pretty long section regarding OTP and the title change and how they don't relate to each other. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and close. And again, I'd like to say thank you to everyone that attended. Very big thank you to our three speakers, and also again all of the students that helped with organizing this event. If any of the speakers have any closing remarks, we can do that, and then we'll go about our Saturdays.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. And go out and learn everything you can learn, and then after that, let's go make some, I'm not going to say more. Let's go have some fun.
Well, I would like to thank you all personally for joining us today for this very important discussion. It's important for you all to understand what's going on in the profession, as this is your profession. You are the future leaders of this organization, of this industry, and we want you to take this seriously. We want you to read about the report, and as Stephen so aptly said, make informed decisions, ask people what their opinions are, learn for yourselves, and get involved. I mean, we really do need your help every which way you can think of. So again, thank you for inviting me to attend. I appreciate it.
I'm ecstatic that we got to do this. And I would say what drew me into AAPA from the get-go was that my voice was heard. We had 18 or 19 students on the House of Delegates the year that I was there. And at no point was I like, oh, you're just a student, your voice doesn't matter. This is your profession, and it's going to be even more of your profession in just a couple months for some of you, so your voice does matter. And with that being said, use your voice appropriately. Don't say mid-level provider, you're not an assistant, all the stuff that I said. Use your voice, because you are going to shape how the future of the profession turns out, not somebody that's been doing it for 40 years. No offense to Dave, but it's you and you alone. So you will shape that, and so shape it well. And it starts with simple things. There's 100 people, there were 100 people on here. Even if all of those people just started to make those small changes that I mentioned, could make a huge ripple effect. So thank you all, and good luck.
Yep. And I'd like to thank Jonathan for putting it together, or at least working so hard to put it
all
together.
Of you guys, thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
All of you, yes.
Thank you so much for presenting. And I actually enabled the attendees to chat. So hopefully you have some thank yous there. This was a great event put together, but yeah, I guess that's our closing. And attendees, you're free to leave if you would like to do so.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.